Every crime tells a story, and every story deserves to be heard. For more true crime stories, kindly hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. He was a trusted LA doctor. She was the grieving widow, but the truth behind his death, darker than anyone imagined. The late summer heat pressed down on Los Angeles, the kind that made palm trees shimmer in the haze and turned the city's boulevards into glowing ribbons of asphalt. Woodland Hills, tucked into the western edge of the San Fernando Valley, seemed far removed from the chaos of downtown. Families strolled along Ventura Boulevard, teenagers clustered outside frozen yogurt shops, and the endless traffic of the 101 roared just out of sight. Inside a modest two-story medical building, Dr. Hamid Mirshoji leaned against the counter of his clinic, reviewing patient files that seemed never to stop piling up. His staff had gone home hours earlier, but Hamid often stayed long after dark. It wasn't unusual for him to return late, laptop tucked under his arm, his wife and baby already asleep. Medicine doesn't clock out at 5, he used to say, half as a joke, half as an oath. For Hamid, this wasn't just a profession. It was the culmination of decades of sacrifice, persistence, and a faith that America, this sprawling, imperfect country, had space for a man like him to leave a mark. Hamid's story began thousands of miles away, in Iran, where he grew up in a family that prized education as the highest form of honor. The young Hamid had always been drawn to science, fascinated by the way the human body could both break down and heal. But medicine was more than intellectual curiosity. It was a calling born from watching neighbors suffer from untreated illnesses, from seeing addiction chew through lives with little support. By the time he reached adulthood, the world around him had grown unstable. The Iranian Revolution and its aftershocks altered everything: politics, economy, even the future he thought he might have. And so, like many of his generation, Hamid looked westward. America represented possibility, the chance to not just survive but to build. When he landed in the United States as a young man, he carried little more than determination. His English was good but halting, his accent thick. He enrolled in school, juggling classes with survival jobs, washing dishes in restaurants, driving delivery trucks, tutoring where he could. The work was grueling, but it didn't break him. Each shift, each exhausted night of study, only sharpened his resolve. Eventually, his persistence paid off. Degrees were earned, licenses obtained, and little by little, Hamid carved out his place in the American medical world. Many of his peers sought lucrative specialties: cardiology, dermatology, plastic surgery. Hamid chose a harder road: addiction medicine. The opioid crisis was not yet splashed across every headline when Hamid entered the field, but he saw it unfolding firsthand. Patients came in broken by dependency, ashamed, often abandoned by their families. He understood something fundamental: addiction was not just a medical issue, it was a human one. And if he could help heal one addict, he was also healing their children, their parents, their partners. It was generational work. In Woodland Hills, his clinic became a quiet haven. The waiting room was modest. No glossy magazines, no high-end decor, but the atmosphere carried something rarer: compassion. People who walked in expecting to be judged found a man who listened, who asked about their lives as much as their symptoms, who believed recovery was possible even when they themselves had stopped believing. At 61, Hamid was both authoritative and approachable. He carried himself with the gravity of someone who had seen suffering up close but refused to grow cold to it. His thick, salt and pepper hair framed a face that could be stern in moments of frustration, but often lit up with warmth when speaking of his patients or his family. He was a man of habits: strong coffee in the mornings, a short walk before clinic hours, poetry in the evenings when time allowed. Rumi was his favorite, verses that spoke of love, longing, and the fragility of life. Colleagues joked that he was half doctor, half philosopher. But to Hamid, those roles were never separate. Healing the body was only half the work. Tending to the soul mattered just as much. But Hamid's dream of America had always been layered with contradictions. On the surface, he embodied success: a respected physician, a stable practice, a growing family. Beneath it, there were fractures: financial pressures, professional battles with insurers, the emotional toll of patients relapsing, and most painfully, the wreckage of a marriage that had once promised permanence. The immigrant story Hamid often told younger Iranian Americans was not a straight line. It was a series of jagged edges, moments of triumph shadowed by losses. He had built something remarkable, yes, but the cost had been steep. On that late summer afternoon, as he gathered his papers and prepared to lock up, Hamid stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The San Fernando Valley stretched wide around him, a blend of suburban calm and city sprawl. He paused, taking in the view of a place that had given him both everything and nothing in equal measure. He could not know that in less than a month, the very dream he had spent decades building would be shattered. He could not know that his name would soon appear not just on clinic signage but across national headlines. For now, he was simply a doctor finishing a long day, a man grateful for his second chance at love, and a father who looked forward to holding his daughter when he got home. But in the quiet edges of his life, shadows were already moving. The waiting room of Dr. Hamid Mirshoji's Woodland Hills clinic rarely sat empty. Even in the quiet hours of early morning, someone was always waiting. A man gripping his knee and bouncing his leg nervously, a woman holding her purse too tightly, a teenager staring at the floor as though the tiles might swallow him whole. This was not a Beverly Hills cosmetic office, with glossy white walls and designer chairs. Hamid's clinic was modest, practical, and sometimes crowded. The paint was chipped in places, the magazines outdated, but patients didn't come for luxury. They came because the man in the white coat beyond that door didn't treat them like lost causes. Los Angeles had no shortage of doctors, but the kind of medicine Hamid practiced, addiction care, urgent treatment for the desperate, was often avoided by others. Too messy, too unpredictable, too exhausting. Yet to Hamid, these were the patients who needed him most. He saw them all. The construction worker hooked on painkillers after an injury, the suburban mother secretly swallowing opioids to get through the day, the college student spiraling on fentanyl, the veteran drinking himself to sleep every night. Their stories varied, but their shame was often the same. They came into his office expecting to be scolded, judged, dismissed. Instead, they found a man who leaned forward, rested his hands on his knees, and asked in a steady voice, "How are you really doing?" He didn't flinch when they confessed relapses. He didn't dismiss the ones who came in for the 5th, 6th, even 10th time. Recovery, he would say, is not a straight road. Curves, it circles, it falls back on itself. But every time you walk through this door, it means you're still trying. That matters. Many left in tears, not because of withdrawal symptoms, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at them as human beings rather than problems. To some of his patients, Hamid became more than a physician, he became a guardian figure. Parents who had lost hope in their children's futures found themselves praying for appointments with him. Some families brought in food as thanks, or sent handwritten notes that said little more than "thank you for seeing us." His phone sometimes buzzed late at night. Former patients would call him, panicked, standing at the edge of relapse. Hamid often answered, even when it was inconvenient, even when his wife sighed at the intrusion. "Take a deep breath," he would tell the trembling voice on the other end. "Where are you right now? Are you safe?" This wasn't in any job description. It wasn't billable. But Hamid understood addiction in a way that went beyond charts and dosages. It was war, and war demanded a soldier willing to keep showing up. But compassion had its cost. Day after day, Hamid absorbed other people's anguish. He carried the smell of antiseptic and despair home with him. There were nights he sat in silence at the dinner table, still thinking about the young man who had overdosed that afternoon or the woman who admitted she used because her husband had left her. His second wife, Ghazal, noticed the toll. She urged him to rest more, to take breaks, to think of himself as much as his patients. But Hamid rarely listened. To him, slowing down felt like betrayal, not of his family, but of the hundreds of people depending on him. His first wife, Ahang, however, saw his work differently. She had once admired his devotion, but over the years it had turned into another wedge between them. She saw long hours at the clinic as time stolen from family, his generosity to patients as foolishness that left him financially stretched. Their fights often circled around this very point, that Hamid gave too much of himself away. Still, in Woodland Hills, Hamid was beloved. His name carried weight in the community, not in the flashy way of celebrity doctors, but in the quiet, dependable way of someone people knew they could count on. He volunteered at local schools, speaking about drug awareness. He visited community centers, offering low-cost screenings. Some Saturdays, he even held free walk-in hours, knowing full well the people who showed up couldn't pay but needed him desperately. Parents whispered his name to one another in support groups. Local addicts knew which clinic door to knock on when the wait became unbearable. And for many in the Persian-American community, Hamid was a symbol, a reminder that their heritage could blend with American opportunity to produce something noble and enduring. But if the community saw him as a saint, Hamid himself knew otherwise. He wrestled with the failures, the patients he couldn't save, the overdoses that still happened. "For every one I pull back," he once told a colleague, 3 more are lost to the tide. He worried about burnout. He worried about bills. He worried, in the quiet of his heart, whether he had spread himself too thin between being healer, husband, and father. His work demanded that he give endlessly, but the man himself was finite, and in those rare quiet moments late at night, staring at the glow of the city from his bedroom window, he sometimes wondered how much more he could give. What he didn't know was that his compassion, his very willingness to stretch himself thin, would make his loss all the more devastating when it came. For when the healer was gone, the community would feel the absence not just as a tragedy, but as a fracture in its very heart. And for Hamid himself, the cracks beneath the surface of his dream were deepening, spreading silently toward a shattering no one could yet imagine. For all his success in the medical world, Hamid Murshoji carried scars that no stethoscope could detect. To the patients who saw him in a white coat, he was a man of certainty, compassion, and control. But behind closed doors, in the quieter corners of his personal life, cracks ran deep. Cracks born not from medicine, but from marriage. When Hamid first married Ahang Kelk, he believed he had found the partner who would walk with him through the labyrinth of the American immigrant experience. She was striking, intelligent, and ambitious. They shared cultural roots, values from their Iranian upbringing, and the desire to build a stable life in Los Angeles. In those early years, their bond had been genuine. They were young parents, navigating the pressures of raising children while chasing careers. Friends remembered the couple hosting lively gatherings, serving saffron rice and kebabs while Persian music floated in the background. Hamid would laugh easily, Ahang at his side, the pair seeming, at least from the outside, to have mastered the balance of tradition and assimilation. But time has a way of reshaping even the strongest foundations. As Hamid's medical career accelerated, the demands of his work pressed harder on the marriage. Nights stretched longer at the clinic. Patients called at odd hours. Even when Hamid was home, his mind was often elsewhere, still circling the unfinished charts, the urgent cases, the addicts clinging to him like a lifeline. Ahang noticed. At first, she admired his devotion, proud to tell others her husband was a doctor saving lives. But admiration soured into irritation. Irritation hardened into resentment. "You give so much to strangers," she once snapped at him, "but you come home empty for your own family." Arguments escalated. Money became a battleground. The clinic was not the cash machine many assumed. Addiction medicine was often financially unstable. Hamid's insistence on treating underinsured patients, on refusing to turn anyone away, strained their household finances. Ahang saw it as recklessness. Hamid saw it as principle. And principles, he believed, were non-negotiable. The more they argued, the less they understood each other. Ahang wanted security, comfort, and recognition for the sacrifices she made raising the children, while Hamid buried himself in work. Hamid wanted understanding, patience, and a partner who saw his mission as more than just a job. Their home became a battlefield of silences and sharp words. Family dinners grew tense, the laughter that once filled their home replaced by strained conversations. Friends noticed the change. Invitations slowed. The couple that once seemed united became known for their distance, their exhaustion. By the time divorce was mentioned, both knew it wasn't a threat. It was inevitable. Divorce, for some, is clean. A paper signed, belongings divided, lives untangled. For Hamid and Ahang, it was anything but. Custody arrangements became contentious. Finances turned into weapons. Court filings dripped with accusations and counter-accusations. Years of unspoken anger spilled into legal documents that painted each as villain to the other's story. And unlike many couples who part ways and eventually settle into detached civility, Hamid and Ahang never found peace. Their divorce did not end their conflict. It crystallized it. To Ahang, Hamid's eventual remarriage was a betrayal layered atop old wounds. To Hamid, her constant challenges, disputes over property, over money, over respect, felt like chains he could never fully break. Friends described Ahang as sharp-tongued, quick to express her discontent, unafraid to confront Hamid publicly or privately. She believed she had been wronged, left behind after giving years of her life to a man who now built a fresh family with another woman. Hamid, on the other hand, rarely spoke of her. When pressed, he would sigh, rub the bridge of his nose, and mutter only, "It's complicated." For him, silence was a defense, a way of keeping the bitterness from infecting the life he was trying to build anew. But silence could not stop the tension from seeping into everything. His finances, his mental peace, even his sense of safety. Behind his calm demeanor, Hamid felt the toll. Divorce had left him wary of intimacy, slower to trust, hesitant to believe that love could last. He buried himself deeper in his clinic, as if healing strangers could somehow compensate for the fractures in his own life. At night, lying awake, he sometimes replayed the marriage in his mind, not out of longing, but out of confusion. How had something that began with promise collapsed so completely? Could he have done more? Or was it doomed from the start? Two strong-willed people unable to bend toward each other's needs? There were no answers, only echoes. What Hamid didn't fully understand was just how deeply the bitterness ran in Ahang. Divorce had not just ended their marriage. It had planted something darker in her. A seed of resentment that would grow, unchecked, into something unthinkable. For now, though, Hamid tried to move forward. He poured himself into his work, into his children, into trying to stitch together some version of stability. The American dream was still alive, but it no longer looked like the glossy picture he once imagined. Instead, it looked cracked, and he was learning, painfully, that even dreams built on sacrifice can fracture under the weight of betrayal. By the time Dr. Hamid Murshoji finalized his divorce from Ahang, his heart was tired. Years of courtroom battles, financial wrangling, and the emotional turbulence of separation had left him wary of romance. Friends encouraged him to remarry, to start fresh. But Hamid often shrugged off their suggestions. "I'm too old for that," he'd say with a half smile, though inside he wasn't so sure. Part of him longed for companionship. Part of him feared repeating the same mistakes. And yet, life has a way of surprising even those who think they've closed themselves to possibility. It was at a gathering hosted by a mutual friend, a cultural event where Persian music played softly, and the air was thick with the aroma of saffron and rosewater, that Hamid first noticed Ghazal Simorg. She was younger than him by nearly 2 decades, her laugh bright and unguarded, her manner graceful but unpretentious. Ghazal was not the type to dominate a room, yet Hamid found his eyes drawn to her repeatedly. They exchanged polite greetings, but it was the second encounter, weeks later, that sparked something more. This time, conversation flowed easily. They spoke of literature, of family, of the challenges of balancing heritage with American life. Ghazal was warm, curious, and unafraid to ask questions that caught Hamid off guard. "Do you ever feel like you live in 2 worlds at once?" she asked him that night, and for the first time in years, Hamid felt truly seen. Their relationship unfolded quietly at first. Hamid, cautious, was slow to trust the fluttering sense of possibility. Ghazal, patient, gave him space. What set her apart was not just her affection but her acceptance. She admired his work, even when it pulled him into long nights at the clinic. She respected his devotion to his children, even when it meant his attention was divided. Where Ahang had often demanded that Hamid choose between family and career, Ghazal believed the two could coexist. "She doesn't see me as a paycheck or a burden," Hamid confided to a friend. "She sees me." In her presence, he rediscovered laughter, the kind that rose easily, unforced. She teased him about his long hours, nudged him to take walks when the stress pressed too heavily on his shoulders, and reminded him in countless small ways that life was not just about survival. It was about joy. Still, Hamid worried. The age gap was significant. He wondered if she would tire of his responsibilities, if his past would weigh too heavily on their future. But Ghazal was unwavering. She told him she loved not only the man he was, but also the man he had struggled to become. Their courtship was not without judgment from outsiders. Some whispered about the age difference, others about the complexity of Hamid's family situation. But the couple pressed on, building their relationship with a mixture of tenderness and determination. When Hamid finally proposed, it was not with grand fanfare, but with sincerity. "Life hasn't always been kind to me," he told her. "But if you'll stand with me, I believe the best is still ahead." She said yes without hesitation. In 2023, their love took on its most tangible form, the birth of a daughter. For Hamid, who was 60 years old when he first held her, the experience was overwhelming. He had raised children before, but this time felt different. Age had slowed him just enough to savor the moments he once rushed past. The late-night feedings, the soft weight of an infant asleep on his chest, the way her tiny fingers wrapped around his own. "She is my second chance," he told colleagues at the clinic, his eyes misting as he showed them pictures on his phone. "Proof that life can begin again, even when you think it's almost over." Ghazal, radiant in her role as mother, poured herself into building a warm, nurturing home. Their apartment in Woodland Hills became a haven filled with the sounds of lullabies, the scent of home-cooked meals, and the quiet rhythm of a family rediscovering joy. Yet even as Hamid embraced this renewal, shadows lingered. His past with Ahang was not neatly tucked away. Legal disputes over money and property continued to flare. Resentments simmered. The existence of his new family only seemed to fuel the bitterness of the old one. Ghazal felt the tension, too. Though she never voiced jealousy, she worried about the constant friction between her husband and his ex-wife. She wanted their daughter to grow up in peace, free from the echoes of old conflicts. But Hamid often brushed aside her concerns. "It will pass," he assured her, though in truth, he wasn't certain. Still, the love between Hamid and Ghazal was a refuge against the storm. They clung to each other, not in desperation but in devotion. When work drained him, she steadied him. When the noise of past battles grew too loud, she reminded him of the life they were building, the daughter they were raising, the laughter that still filled their home. Hamid, once convinced he was too old for new beginnings, now found himself deeply grateful for the risk he had taken. He had chosen love again, and in return, love had given him renewal. He carried his daughter's photo in his wallet. He spoke of Ghazal with warmth to colleagues. And though the cracks of the past had not disappeared, he believed, for the first time in years, that his future was something worth protecting fiercely. What he could not know was how fragile that future truly was. Because in the shadows, resentment was growing. And resentment, when mixed with envy and bitterness, can become something deadly. For Dr. Hamid Murshoji, life had become a delicate balancing act. On one side was Ghazal, his luminous second chance, his partner in renewal, the mother of his youngest child. On the other was Ahang, the ex-wife who had once shared his dreams, now standing as a relentless reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The two women could not have been more different. Yet they were bound together by their connection to him, their claims on his life, and the daughter whose laughter filled his home. At 37, Ghazal embodied a blend of warmth and determination. She had grown up in a close-knit family that valued resilience, and she carried those lessons into her marriage. Where Hamid brought experience and stability, she brought energy and patience. Neighbors often saw her pushing the stroller around the leafy streets of Woodland Hills, her daughter's giggles echoing in the afternoon air. To them, Ghazal looked like a woman who had everything: a devoted husband, a healthy child, and a home filled with promise. But behind her smile lay the quiet awareness that she was living in the shadow of another woman. She rarely spoke of a hang, but the name hovered in their home like a ghost. Court letters, lawyers' emails, whispers of disputes. These were constant reminders that Hamid's past was not easily erased. Still, Ghazal loved fiercely. She believed in protecting the little world they had built, in shielding their daughter from bitterness. She urged Hamid to let go of old battles, to focus on what mattered. "We can't fight yesterday forever," she told him more than once. "Our daughter deserves today." Hamid would nod, sometimes even agree, but the past had claws. If Ghazal represented renewal, a hang embodied what was lost. Once celebrated for her beauty and intellect, she now lived with the weight of betrayal, or at least what she perceived as betrayal. Their marriage had not ended suddenly. It had frayed over time. But when Hamid found love again, when he brought a younger woman into the role she once filled, a hang's sense of displacement grew unbearable. To her, Ghazal was not just another wife. She was a usurper. Friends who once admired a hang began to drift away, uncomfortable with her sharp edges and frequent complaints. She spoke often of money, of fairness, of all that she had sacrificed. "I gave him my best years," she told anyone who would listen, "and now he lives like a king while I scrape by." But the truth was more complicated. Hamid supported her financially, even beyond what was required. Yet for a hang, no sum of money could soothe the ache of being replaced. Inevitably, the two women's lives intersected, not in person, but in the courtrooms, emails, and whispered exchanges that defined Hamid's middle years. To Ghazal, these conflicts were exhausting, intrusions into her family's peace. She wished a hang would let go, move forward, find her own happiness. But to a hang, letting go felt like losing the last tether to the life she had built with Hamid. Their daughter became both bridge and battleground. When Hamid showed a hang photos of the child he now adored, she saw not joy but insult. When Ghazal watched Hamid leave the house, weary from another meeting with lawyers, she saw not fairness but punishment. It was, in every sense, a tale of two women bound by a single man and the complicated legacy of love, loss, and renewal. Caught in the middle, Hamid often felt as though he was being torn in two. He wanted peace but found himself pulled into conflict. He wanted to protect Ghazal from the storms of his past but couldn't prevent the rain from seeping in. To his colleagues, he joked lightly about the price of being too human. But behind closed doors, he confessed his weariness. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still married to two women," he told a friend over coffee. "One in love, one in war." And yet, despite the tension, he never doubted his love for Ghazal. She was his anchor, his fresh beginning. His daughter with her was his legacy of hope. What he feared most was that the battles with a hang would taint that gift, would steal the light from the family he had fought so hard to rebuild. Though younger, Ghazal carried herself with remarkable wisdom. She knew her husband's heart was heavy, and she tried to lighten it in small ways. She filled their home with laughter, hosted dinners for friends, encouraged Hamid to rest when exhaustion overtook him. But in her private moments, she wrestled with doubt. Would the shadows of his past ever truly fade? Would their daughter grow up hearing bitterness instead of lullabies? Her greatest fear was not that Hamid would leave her. It was that the toxicity of the past would poison their future. Still, she chose love as her answer, every day, even when the weight felt unbearable. Meanwhile, a hang's resentment hardened into something sharper. Her life, once vibrant, now revolved around grievances. She told herself she was fighting for justice, for dignity, but the truth was murkier. Every time she saw Hamid smile with Ghazal, every time she heard of his new daughter, the wound inside her deepened. Jealousy is not always loud. Sometimes it simmers, silent and corrosive, until it finds a crack through which to spill. For a hang, that crack was widening. And so Hamid lived between two worlds. In one home, laughter, lullabies, and new beginnings filled the air. Ghazal's gentle strength and their daughter's bright eyes offered hope that life could still surprise him with joy. In another space, Even from a distance, bitterness and memory pulled at him like undertows. A hang's shadow stretched long, her voice echoing through lawyers and disputes, through whispered accusations that never seemed to end. What made the story so piercing was not just the difference between the two women. It was the way Hamid's life embodied both at once. Renewal and resentment, peace and conflict, love and bitterness existed side by side, tangled in ways that could not easily be undone. Those close to the family began to sense the tension sharpening. Friends who visited noticed how Hamid's smile sometimes faltered when his phone buzzed late at night. Colleagues saw the lines deepen on his face, the weariness in his eyes. To the outside world, he was a respected doctor, a husband with a younger wife, a father once more in his 60s. But beneath the surface, the push and pull of two lives, the one he had built and the one he had left, was reaching a dangerous boiling point. What none of them could yet know was how far that tension would stretch. How envy, when paired with unresolved wounds, could shift from bitterness into something far darker. There is a peculiar weight to the final moments before tragedy, an invisible heaviness that those who live through it can never quite forget. For Dr. Hamid Mirshoji and Ghazal, the evening before everything changed felt, on the surface, like any other night. Yet underneath the ordinary gestures, the meal shared, the laughter of their daughter, the subtle routines that stitched their family life together, there was an undercurrent, a silent pull, as though fate itself were holding its breath. It was a mild Los Angeles evening. The city hummed with its usual rhythm, cars streaming through boulevards, neon signs flickering alive, the distant echo of laughter from restaurants where strangers gathered. Inside the Mirshoji household, however, the world was small, intimate, contained within the walls of a home that had weathered both joy and conflict. Hamid arrived later than usual, his shoulders slumped, exhaustion visible in his gait. He placed his bag by the door and loosened his tie with the slow movements of a man who had carried too many burdens for too long. "Long day?" Ghazal asked softly, meeting him at the doorway. He gave her a tired smile. "Long week." Their daughter ran into his arms, her laughter filling the space like sunlight breaking through clouds. In that instant, Hamid seemed to shed his weariness. He lifted the little girl and kissed her cheek, his face lighting up in a way that erased, if only briefly, the shadows of stress. This was his sanctuary, this home, these two people. And yet, even here, he was not entirely free. As they sat down for dinner, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the warmth of their meal. Hamid glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. Ghazal noticed it was impossible not to. "A hang again?" she asked, though she already knew. He nodded, silencing the call and setting the phone face down on the table. The silence that followed was heavier than the ringing itself. Their daughter babbled happily about her day, unaware of the tension threading between her parents. Hamid listened, nodding, but his eyes were far away, anchored to the phone he refused to answer. It wasn't the first time, and Ghazal knew it wouldn't be the last. The past, relentless and unyielding, refused to let them be. Later, after their daughter was tucked into bed, Hamid sat in the living room with a glass of tea cooling in his hands. Ghazal joined him, her gaze steady, searching. "You can't keep ignoring her," she said finally. "I know." His voice was quiet, but every conversation ends in the same place. Anger, demands. Nothing changes. She won't stop until you face it. Hamid looked at her then, truly looked, and the exhaustion in his eyes seemed to deepen. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't wake up every day with it weighing on me?" Ghazal's chest tightened. She loved this man, but she also knew how heavily he carried his mistakes, his regrets, his fractured past. And in that moment, she wondered, not for the first time, if love alone was enough to protect them from what loomed beyond their door. Despite the tension, they tried to reclaim the night. Hamid poured another cup of tea, the steam curling upward in delicate ribbons. Ghazal lit a candle on the coffee table, its flicker casting their shadows against the wall. For a while, they sat in silence, not hostile but fragile, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the tenuous peace. At one point, Hamid reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. His hand was warm, steady, familiar. It was a silent apology, a silent reassurance, a silent plea. Stay with me. Believe in me. Don't let this break us. Ghazal squeezed back. It was her way of saying, I'm here, but I'm afraid. When the house finally quieted, they retreated to bed. Ghazal lay beside him, listening to his breathing, waiting for the rhythm of sleep to take him. Yet even in slumber, Hamid was restless. He shifted, sighed, murmured in half-dreams. His hands twitched as though fighting battles that existed only in his mind. Ghazal stared at the ceiling, the glow of the city faintly visible through the curtains. A knot of unease pressed into her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just another night, just another ripple in the long river of their complicated life. But deep down, she felt something else. An intuition, a quiet whisper she couldn't quite silence. Something is coming. While they slept, Los Angeles carried on. In hospitals across the city, patients clung to life. In bars, laughter spilled into the streets. In quiet apartments, people dreamed of futures both hopeful and uncertain. But somewhere out there, beyond their walls, beyond their attempts at peace, forces stirred. Resentments sharpened into intentions. Fractured relationships hardened into plans. The storm Hamid had long feared was no longer gathering. It was nearly here. In the early hours of the morning, Hamid stirred. Ghazal woke to find him sitting at the edge of the bed, his silhouette dark against the faint glow of the streetlights outside. You should sleep, she whispered. I can't, he admitted. His voice was low, almost fragile. She sat up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. What's on your mind? He hesitated before speaking. I've made mistakes, Ghazal. More than I can count. I thought I could manage it all, the past, the present, the future. But it's all catching up to me. Her throat tightened. You've also saved lives, built a family, loved us. Don't forget that. He turned, his eyes glistening with a weariness that went beyond fatigue. Sometimes love isn't enough. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm. Then we fight for it, together. He didn't respond, but the faintest trace of a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He lay back down, pulling her close, and for a fleeting moment, the heaviness lifted. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky in muted pinks and grays, the Mershoji household stirred awake. Their daughter bounded into the room, her laughter chasing away the remnants of night's unease. Breakfast was prepared, clothes laid out, the day ahead seeming deceptively ordinary. Hamid kissed his daughter's forehead, savoring the scent of her hair, the innocence of her joy. He pressed his lips to Ghazal's cheek, lingering a moment longer than usual. And though no one in the room could have known it, those gestures, those simple, everyday acts of love, would become memories etched in permanence. For by the time the sun set again, their world would be irrevocably changed. There are moments that fracture time, moments so violent in their impact that everything before them feels like another life, another story, one belonging to someone else. For Ghazal, that moment came on a Saturday morning when she found herself staring into a silence so thick, so unnatural. It made her skin prickle with dread. What she did not yet know, what she could not allow herself to imagine, was that this silence would become the sound her life carried forever. The day began with the ordinary. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the house. Sunlight pressed its way through half-closed blinds, striping the living room floor in gold and shadow. Ghazal moved through her routines almost mechanically, packing a small snack for their daughter, tidying the kitchen, humming a Persian lullaby under her breath. Hamid was supposed to have risen early. He often left the house before the family fully stirred, his work consuming him even on weekends. But this morning, the house seemed wrong without the sound of his movements. No footsteps down the hall, no soft rustle of papers, no shower running. At first, she thought nothing of it. He deserved to rest. He had carried exhaustion in his eyes for weeks. Perhaps, she told herself, he was finally allowing his body to recover. But then the silence stretched and stretched until it no longer felt like rest at all. Carrying a mug of tea, Ghazal made her way toward their bedroom. With every step, unease tightened its grip on her chest. Something primal stirred within her. A quiet, relentless alarm that whispered, "Something isn't right." She pushed open the door. Hamid lay in bed, motionless, the sheets gathered loosely around him. For one brief, fragile moment, it looked as though he were sleeping. His face angled toward the window where sunlight gently kissed his skin. But even before she spoke his name, Ghazal knew. "Hamid?" Her voice broke on the second syllable. She set the mug down hastily, crossing the room. Her hand reached for his shoulder, shaking gently at first, then more urgently. His body was cool, too still, his chest unmoving beneath her touch. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, shaking harder now. "Hamid, wake up. Please wake up." But there was no response. The world tilted, spinning around her. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed beside the bed, her breath shallow and frantic. The next moments unfolded in chaos, Ghazal's cries piercing the walls of the house, the trembling of her hands as she fumbled for her phone, the frantic rush of dialing 911. Her words tumbled out in gasps, almost incoherent. "My husband, he's not breathing. Please, please, I don't know what to do." The dispatcher's calm, clinical instructions contrasted cruelly with the hysteria rising in her chest. "Perform CPR. Check his airway. Count compressions. Push harder. Don't stop." Her palms pressed down against his chest, over and over, but every compression felt like pressing against stone, as though life itself had already slipped too far away. Tears blurred her vision. She screamed his name between gasps for air, her pleas desperate, frantic, bargaining with the silence that answered her. When the paramedics arrived minutes later, they found her collapsed over his body, her hands bloodless from effort, her voice hoarse from screaming. They pulled her gently back, taking over with practiced urgency. Machines beeped, paddles pressed, voices exchanged rapid commands. At 8:17 a.m., Dr. Hamid Murshoji was pronounced dead. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ghazal sat on the edge of the bed, her body trembling uncontrollably, her mind caught between disbelief and a reality too raw to comprehend. Their daughter appeared at the doorway, confusion etched across her small face. "Mama? Why are there people here? What's happening to Baba?" The words sliced through her like a blade. How could she explain the unexplainable? How could she tell her child that the man who had kissed her forehead the night before was now gone forever? Ghazal pulled her daughter close, shielding her eyes from the scene, whispering words that felt hollow even as they left her lips. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. Mama's here." But nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. At first, the paramedics treated it as a medical emergency. Nothing more. A man, exhausted and overworked, gone too soon. But when the first responders stepped outside to confer quietly, their tones shifted. Something about the scene unsettled them. The lack of medical history to suggest sudden failure, the unanswered questions surrounding his health, the whispers of past domestic turmoil that lingered in quiet corners of his life. Soon, the house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a scene. Police officers arrived, notebooks in hand, eyes sharp with curiosity and suspicion. The questions began almost immediately, each one slicing through Ghazal's grief. When did you last see him alive? Did he complain of chest pain, headaches? Anything unusual? Was he under stress? Has there been any conflict at home? She answered through sobs, her words tumbling incoherently. But beneath the surface, a shadow began to form, one that would grow larger with every passing hour. This was not going to be treated as a natural death. This was the beginning of something darker. News travels fast in Los Angeles, especially when it concerns a respected doctor, a man who had touched the lives of countless patients. By afternoon, whispers had already begun among colleagues, neighbors, and extended family. "Did you hear? He died suddenly in his sleep. No, they say it looked suspicious. Didn't he have trouble at home? Didn't his ex cause issues? I heard the police are investigating." For Ghazal, still reeling from shock, The murmurs were cruel intrusions into her grief. She wanted nothing more than to hold her daughter, to collapse into the memory of her husband's arms, to rewind time and undo the nightmare that had swallowed their lives whole. But instead, she found herself caught in a storm of speculation, her every word and gesture scrutinized by eyes both familiar and foreign. That night, when the last officer left and the house fell quiet once more, Ghazal sat in the living room surrounded by traces of the life she had lost. His jacket hung by the door. His shoes rested neatly at the foot of the bed. His mug of tea still sat on the nightstand, cold and untouched. Every object screamed of absence. Every corner echoed with what had been. Her daughter slept fitfully, clutching one of her father's shirts as though holding onto the man himself. Ghazal watched her through the cracked door, her heart breaking anew. How do you explain to a child that the person they love most in the world is never coming back? How do you guide her through grief when you are drowning in it yourself? The questions offered no answers, only silence. And in that silence, a darker thought began to take shape in Ghazal's mind. If this wasn't natural, if Hamid had truly been taken from them by someone's hand, then who and why? By the following morning, detectives had formally opened a suspicious death investigation. They sealed parts of the house, collected samples, interviewed neighbors. Every detail of Ghazal's life was suddenly under a microscope. She was no longer simply a widow. She was a witness, a potential suspect, a woman thrust into the center of a story she had never asked to tell. The life she had built with Hamid, the family dinners, the laughter, the fragile reconciliations was gone. What remained was uncertainty, fear, and the unbearable truth that the man she loved had not simply slipped away in the night. And in that realization, a new chapter of her life began. One that would not be defined by love alone, but by grief, suspicion, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Death does not rest. Even as Ghazal tried to gather the fragments of her broken world, the machinery of the state pressed forward, indifferent to her grief. By Monday morning, Hamid's body had been transferred to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's office. There, under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, strangers in surgical masks began the grim work of unraveling the mystery of his death. For Ghazal, the hours crawled by like centuries. She sat alone in her living room, the silence of the house unbearable, every tick of the clock reminding her that somewhere, someone was cutting into her husband's body, seeking answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Detectives came and went, their questions sharp, their tone professional but edged with suspicion. What medications was your husband on? Did he drink? Use drugs? Take supplements? Was he depressed? Were you two having marital problems? Each question felt like an accusation cloaked in curiosity. Ghazal answered as best she could, though her words tangled in grief. No, he didn't drink. No, he wasn't depressed. Yes, they had disagreements like any couple, but they had been working through them. The detectives scribbled notes, exchanged glances she couldn't decipher, and left with promises to stay in touch. But when the door closed behind them, Ghazal felt the weight of their unspoken doubts pressing into her chest. In their eyes, she wasn't just a grieving widow. She was a puzzle piece that might fit into something darker. 3 days later, the results arrived. The call came in the afternoon. Ghazal sat on the edge of the couch, twisting the hem of her sweater as Detective Morales' voice buzzed in her ear. His words were clinical, unyielding. The autopsy revealed traces of a powerful sedative in Dr. Mershogi's system. The levels are consistent with intentional ingestion, not accidental exposure. At this point, we're treating his death as suspicious. Ghazal's mind spun. A sedative? Hamid never used sedatives. He had been meticulous about his health, almost to a fault. The only medicine he took regularly was for mild hypertension. What does that mean? She whispered, her throat raw. It means we'll need to ask more questions, Morales replied. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, the kind that suggested those questions would cut deeper, sharper. As the call ended, Ghazal sat frozen, the phone heavy in her hand. The word suspicious rang in her ears like a curse. Within 24 hours, the story broke. A local station aired the headline first. Prominent LA doctor dies under mysterious circumstances. Police investigating possible foul play. By evening, the news had leapt to national outlets. Photos of Hamid appeared on screens across the country, his smiling face juxtaposed with words like murder, poisoning, and domestic dispute. Neighbors who once waved warmly now whispered behind drawn blinds. Reporters camped outside the family's home, their cameras ready, their questions invasive. Mrs. Mershoji, do you have a comment on the investigation? Did your husband have enemies? Are you cooperating with police? Their voices blurred into one, the questions ricocheting in Ghazal's skull. Each step she took outside was a performance, her grief dissected by strangers, her every glance and gesture interpreted as evidence. Through it all, their daughter's sorrow grew heavier, sharper. She stopped eating her favorite foods. She refused to sleep alone, waking in the night with nightmares that sent her running to Ghazal's bed. Why are they saying Baba was hurt? She asked one morning, her small voice trembling. Did someone hurt him? Ghazal's heart cracked under the weight of the question. How could she protect her child from a truth she herself couldn't yet comprehend? She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face and whispered, Baba loved you more than anything in this world. That's what matters. But even as she spoke, she knew love alone couldn't shield them from the storm that was gathering. The community that had once rallied around Hamid was now divided. Some colleagues and friends called Ghazal with genuine compassion, their voices heavy with condolences. Others grew distant, their silence deafening. Behind closed doors, speculation ran wild. Some pointed fingers at Ghazal herself, whispering about marital tension, about arguments overheard, about the possibility that grief was not the only reason for her trembling hands. Others hinted at professional jealousy. Hamid had risen quickly in his field, earning accolades and opportunities that may have stirred resentment. Could someone from his work have played a role? Theories multiplied like shadows, each one darker than the last. For more chilling true crime content, subscribe to the channel. I will drop the second episode on Monday. See you soon.